Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the July 9th, 2024 Planning Commission regular meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Staff, will you please call roll?
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Yodowitz,
Here.
Commissioner Simmons,
Here.
Vice Chair Tagney,
Here.
and Chair Davies,
Here.
and Commissioner Strickland.
Also here.
And Commissioner Strickland, can you go through the motions to describe why you're attending on Zoom?
Sure thing. I'm attending on Zoom because I am conducting state business and there is nobody in the room with me.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for that. We are joined this evening by Community Development Director David Loya. And next we will have oral communications. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak to one of our agenda items, you will have an opportunity when we are discussing those items. If you have comments about items that are not listed on our agenda this evening, please line up now behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make comments on matters that are not on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen or by pressing *9 on your phone. The clerk will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. With that, I'd like to open public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment during early oral communications. Feel free to state your name for the record. And seeing no one here with us in the gallery, do we have anyone waiting online to contribute to our evening meeting this evening?
There's no one online tonight.
Okay. We appreciate everyone out there who is watching our meeting. We will now move on to item 3, our consent calendar. We have one item on consent this evening, and that is to approve Planning Commission minutes from our regular meeting, June 25th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. I understand that Commissioner Strickland would like to pull the minutes. Abby, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I just noticed that the time that we ended our previous meeting was wrong. It said 8:47, I believe, and it was closer to like 6:47.
Good catch. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think we might have even been 5:47. I think we finished that meeting in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, 5:47.
5:47, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're, yes.
So we're looking for a motion to approve those minutes with a change to the end time.
I will make that motion to approve the minutes with the corrected closing time.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And
Aye.
I'm
Aye.
sorry, because I'm, one of the nuances to having a commissioner attend remotely is that we actually have to do roll call votes, so I'll run through the roll call. Commissioner Strickland?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Yodowitz,
Aye.
Commissioner Simmons,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tagny,
Aye.
and Chair Davies.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you for that. We will go on to now our business items, since we have no public hearings. And our business item this evening is to make recommendations on inclusionary zoning and density bonus ordinances. Can we please begin with a staff report?
Good evening, Commission. This item is a follow-on action that was established with the work that you did on the general plan. If you recall, there were a lot of discussions around establishing inclusionary zoning. We talked a lot about the overlap between inclusionary zoning and density bonus. And I don't plan to kind of rehash those discussions, but happy to answer any questions if you want refreshers, or if you have questions as they pertain to the ordinances that we have before you tonight. And this is just a business item. This is an initial step. If we do have, or we will eventually have a formal recommendation that's a notice public hearing. So you'll see these documents again, but really what I wanted to do was to have you take a look at these, weigh in as the Planning Commission, be able to convey a recommendation to the City Council, have the City Council then, provide that formal direction. Since this is a, largely a policy decision, I wanted to have that step inserted into the public process before bringing forward, documents that are ready for adoption. This may be a topic ultimately that you discuss at your joint study session with the City Council, if it seems relevant at that time, and so keep that in mind. What you have in your attachments are two draft ordinances. One is would be included as Chapter 9.32 in our Land Use Code. That is the citywide zoning ordinance. So this inclusionary zoning would apply citywide. Inclusionary zoning initially started as a discussion around larger scale projects in the Gateway area, and then turned into a more of a citywide discussion. Previously, we were talking about having larger thresholds for a trigger point for inclusionary zoning, up to 30 units. That's been dropped down by the council to 15 units. In addition, if you look in section 932030, this is reflected, but you may recall the council wanted to see every project that was subject to inclusionary zoning include 3% for very low income, 6% for low income, and 10% for moderate income. And so those were sort of the nuts and bolts that the City Council gave as direction: go out and make an ordinance that looks like that. Sounds simple enough. You have before you the 30 or so pages that actually accomplish what the council was asking us to do. So what I've done here is I've taken the framework from section 9, chapter 932, that the City Council in around 2014 removed from the zoning ordinance. We used to have inclusionary zoning back in the day. It was adopted in 2008. We removed it in 2014. We're now bringing it back in 2024. And so I used a lot of the same text, but I deleted some of the things that just, weren't functional from that original text, and then added in concepts that I think will be helpful. There are a couple of items in here, and we won't go through each of these, but where you see in attachment A, the inclusionary zoning ordinance, where you see underlined sections, these are just sections that are kind of questions. Should we include this or not? So if the Planning Commission wants to dig into detail on those, we can discuss them in more detail. I put them in here for discussion purposes, but if you're ready to make a recommendation that includes all of these, you can just move on with that. And then when you, and then the other thing about the inclusionary zoning ordinance I wanted to make sure that I let you know is that I did add into this section 932050 that starts on packet page 10, concessions and incentives. You'll recall from our discussion around inclusionary zoning, density bonus, and the community benefits program, and the Venn diagrams, how those things overlap, that the more similar they are, the more people will filter towards gravitate towards density bonus, because density bonus gives them more tools to have to give less in the projects. They can, be exempted from development standards. They can be, they can waive fees and that sort of thing by right if they use density bonus. So what I've attempted to do in this version of the draft inclusionary zoning ordinance is to add concessions and incentives that are similar to density bonus concessions and incentives, so that if someone was subject to inclusionary zoning, this gives them a little bit of motivation to stay in inclusionary zoning instead of drifting towards density bonus. It remains to be seen whether this will work or not. But I did want to draw your attention to the fact that we kind of give the same sorts of exemptions from our standards that the state law gives to people who take advantage of density bonus. The second attachment, attachment B, is our density bonus ordinance. And that starts on packet page 21. We currently have in chapter 9.31 of our land use code a density bonus ordinance. It is way out of date though. It's completely out of sync with current state density bonus. So what the underlining in strikeout in this document means is text that's going to be stricken is stricken. Text that is double underlined and bolded is text that we're proposing to bring in and add to the existing ordinance. So unlike the inclusionary zoning where the underlining means you should think about this and tell me what you think, in this, in the density bonus section, the underlining means this is new text to be added to an existing ordinance. We could simplify this chapter even more by basically saying whatever state law allows for, look there and do that. The state density bonus law has changed so many times over the years. We eventually just decided we're just not updating our ordinance and we're going to defer to the state anyway. We haven't had a single density bonus, well, I take that back. We may have had one density bonus project in the entire time that I've worked for the city of Arcata. So these really just haven't been used much yet. That may change now that we have inclusionary zoning again, and it may change also with some of the benefits that state law provides for in density bonus. So we have yet to see that. So I'm going to pause there and turn it back to the Planning Commission. If you have any questions or you want to dig into any of this policy detail, we can do that. Ultimately, we don't need a formal recommendation. If the council wants to take, or I'm sorry, the Planning Commission wants to make a recommendation to the council and you want to take a formal action, you can. Or if you want to just pass on some recommendations kind of via straw poll, you can do that as well. So it's really flexible and up to you how you want to manage this going forward. I do have the staff report up on the screen, but there's no one here to take a look at it anyway. But if you want to look at it on the screen, I can jump to those sections.
Okay, thank you very much. And are there any questions from commissioners for staff? Go ahead, Joel.
Director Loya, I just have a question regarding the city, well, on packet page 9, the proposed inclusionary housing ordinance, in terms of, I thought I heard you say the council wanted 3% very low and 6% low and 10% moderate? Because this says 3% low, very low, or 6% low and 10% moderate.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I may have misspoken. I think when we were talking before the meeting, I conveyed that it was and. But A and B are alternates. You can either pick 3% or you can pick 6%, but then you also have to do 10% moderate income in either of those choices.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, so is our lack of compliance with the density bonus laws what's driving this inclusionary zoning update?
No, I would say that the discussions around trying to ensure that when we're having these higher density developments that we were talking about in the gateway, didn't leave lower income households behind and ensured that there were provisions for, deed restricted low income housing combined with these projects. And that was a way that we didn't, gentrify the neighborhoods and eliminate the ability for lower income households to live in Arcata. So that's where the conversation started. And as the conversation evolved, it eventually got to, look, we should be doing inclusionary zoning throughout the city everywhere. And we shouldn't be waiting for these larger scale projects to happen. We should have them happen with, smaller scale projects up, as low as 15 units. There are open questions, I think, whether or not projects at 15 units that then have to provide for affordable housing will be financially viable. But this is the direction that we've received at this point. This is the policy direction that we've received, and so that's how we've built this ordinance. The reason why you're seeing both density bonus and inclusionary zoning come together is because it's timely. It's, since you're already looking at inclusionary zoning, it makes sense to update the density bonus zoning ordinance as well and try and make it compatible with the state law. And it also gives you a good comparison between the two. As you're looking at them both, you can say, oh, I understand, the need to include some of these incentives in inclusionary zoning, to offset the drift towards density bonus. So really, all of this really evolved out of the conversations that we started with when we were contemplating these larger scale projects in the Gateway.
Okay, thank you. And I know when inclusionary zoning wasn't part of the show in the past years, as described in the packet, until what, 2012 it stopped, and 2014 it was pulled, is that correct? Something like that? My question is there legacy inclusionary zoning projects in the city that the city is still required to manage for the income qualifications and all of that? And that same question morphed into us going forward. Is there going to be like a staff position or something that just, this looks like a lot. If many projects did this and you have to like get yearly updates on who's income qualified and, who's living where and all this kind of stuff, it just looks like a lot to manage. Not in a bad way. I just wonder if there's some staffing plan or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. At this point, we don't have a staffing plan. Our monitoring responsibilities can be as robust as we choose to make them. We do have a couple of, let me jump back to your first question. Do we have current inclusionary zoning that we, that's extant in the city? And the answer is yes. We have several units. Some of them are in, projects that are, completely, private and aren't related to affordable housing developers. They were triggered based on, the number of units that were being developed. And we have deed restrictions on those titles, and they're required to do the income verification, ensure that they're meeting those obligations. We have several projects that the city actually participated in. Most of our inclusionary zoning was the result of single-family subdivisions. And so the Sorensen project, for example, Janes Creek Meadows, that was a major subdivision. It had an inclusionary zoning trigger, and at that time they chose to dedicate land, and so they basically gave the city a portion of that subdivision. The city then sold that land to Housing Humboldt, and Housing Humboldt developed it with assistance from the city. And so in the north end of that subdivision, there are, I think, 9 homes that are inclusionary zoning units that are owned by people who are, lower income. And so we have several of those throughout the city. We also have several that we relinquished the inclusionary zoning requirement on in 2012, 2014 in that era, because we just didn't have the subsidy to assist with those anymore. The idea that we were playing with here in developing this round of inclusionary zoning early on was that at lower numbers, our inclusionary zoning used to trigger at 5 units. So as soon as you got above 5 units, you had to start providing inclusionary zoning units. At those low numbers, it's only financially feasible if the city participates financially. The theory here was that if you get above a certain number, 30 units, 45 units, 60 units, once you get at a certain density, providing a small percentage of 60 units, 1 to 5 units out of 60 to inclusionary zoning isn't going to make a huge impact on the financials for that project.
What about 15 units?
At 15, it's an open question. I have my doubts. I think I presented those during the the development of this policy. But again, this is the policy that we've decided on. This is the direction we're going, and so I think it really will bear out as projects are coming forward. They'll be able to tell us, look, I've run the financial model, and I just can't develop using this. I need an exception. Can you change the ordinance? And we'll have that conversation at that time.
I think the other trigger to look for would be just a whole lot of 14-unit apartment complexes being proposed, right? Because some people might want to just stay right under that trigger.
That's a possibility too, yeah. And so how we monitor these going forward, with the projects where we participated financially, we typically have a grant associated with it, and we have grant monitoring responsibilities, and we do have staff that are paid to do that. For the private market ones that didn't have any financial participation with the city, we basically just periodically monitor those. And so it's not, I wouldn't think of it as like as we develop and start to get, tens, 20s, hundreds of these units that are, inclusionary zoning. That doesn't mean every year we have to check every single one of those. We'll have a program where we spot check and make sure people are abiding by the regulations. They'll have a lease writer. It'll be self-reporting. Someone who rents that will read their lease and they'll say, hey, I'm supposed to be, this is supposed to be an affordable unit. Is it an affordable unit? Contact the city, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no more, did you have another question?
Well,
I have questions, yeah.
and are we just doing questions, or are we also doing sort of suggested?
We're doing questions now, and then I'll turn it over to public comment, and then we can have a discussion amongst ourselves.
Well, okay, so I also do have a question. So on packet page 11, it talks about fee waivers as one of the potential incentives, and you just said that was one of the incentives that you were trying to match to the density bonus. I'm curious if we can have just sort of more of a discussion in the future about fees and what are typical fees and what fees should be waived and what fees shouldn't, because I think some are probably we'd probably be more comfortable waiving than others, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah, we can definitely do that. And a lot of the fees are, sort of mandated, the building permit fees. But density bonus does allow for, waiving, additional fees like, recreation fee for new construction, for example, park fees, or, if there are other, we don't have a whole lot of development fees, but, to the extent that there are, they can get those kinds of fee waivers. But yeah, we can definitely have a further discussion about that. I think it's important to understand, the cost of development. I mean, having these conversations in the abstract leads to, policy decisions that aren't informed by what it really takes to build units.
Melissa?
Yeah, if a developer came forward and these ordinances were impeding them from developing at the density that they want, would the department, or I guess the zoning code, allow for a variance of these ordinances as it's written right now?
No, they really don't. In that sort of situation, a developer would have to come to the city council and plead their case, basically. That, hey, this ordinance isn't allowing me to pencil a project in your community. I think more often than not, what will happen is that, developers are constantly looking at properties, looking at jurisdictions, trying to figure out, like, is this a good place for me to develop or not? and they're running models, financial models to answer that question. And so more often than not, a developer is going to look at a piece of land that, comes on the market, they're going to run their model, and if it doesn't pencil, whether it's because of the fact that we have inclusionary zoning or if some other, factor, we're just never going to hear from them. And so, it's hard to get this kind of information. We do have, relationships with our local developers, and we're constantly having conversations around this to make sure that we're not creating barriers. One of the things that we have to do in our housing element review is to evaluate the barriers to development based on governmental constraints, whether it's, zoning ordinances, inclusionary zoning requirements, fees at the counter. And so we evaluate those and then try and address them at a policy level at that time periodically. But it's really hard to get information about our governmental constraints if people are literally just running their financial model and never talking to us. So there's no exemption. The quick answer to your question, there's no exemption to these. They're across the board. In the inclusionary zoning proposal right now on packet page 9, there is an alternative to inclusionary housing. It's 932-030A2. And those alternatives would be, either 50% of the development is reserved for senior citizens, or 50% is reserved for qualifying disabled households. But still, that's, larger proportion than is already embedded. So unless a developer was coming forward with the specific intent to develop a, senior housing project, we're probably not going to get a whole lot of people who are taking that alternative. But other than that, there's no exemption. We used to have a fee-based alternative where you could just pay instead of doing inclusionary zoning. But there's recent court action on inclusionary zoning fee-based programs that make them really suspect. So we're not proposing to do those.
This is just maybe a housekeeping mathematical question. In the entirety of the zoning code, is there any provision about the rounding of fractions? Because, for example, if you have 15 units and 10% of them need to be reserved for moderate income, that comes out to be 1.5 units. So would that developer then need to have 2 or 1?
Yeah, so if you look at our density calculation, it typically, for base density, rounds when you get above the 0.5, you get above a half a unit. But state law requires for density bonus that as soon as you're 0.001 above a unit, that you round up to the next unit. So always rounding up.
And then I just had one other question, and just kind of point of clarity. This would be at the top of packet page 11, where it says general density bonus. I just want to understand, because I wasn't maybe here for previous conversations when you guys were talking about that Venn diagram, the way that, the ordinance and the state law would interact with each other. So if our density bonus law allows, in provision in subparagraph 1 at the top of page 9, if our density bonus law allows a 25% increase, and let's say if a project qualifies for an 80% density bonus using state law, do they stack, or is the 25 included in the 80?
Yeah, no, they would be calculated separately. So if someone chose to do density bonus, they would be subject to the density bonus section and not the inclusionary zoning section, I believe is how that would work.
Sorry, but if they met all the requirements for inclusionary zoning and then also met all the requirements for the state density bonus law, could they get both?
No, I think it's that if they choose the density bonus, then they're already exceeding the inclusionary zoning requirements, and they would be subject to the incentives, concessions, and density bonuses benefits that they would receive through state law, not through the inclusionary zoning, not through this 25% increase. So the short answer is no, they would not be able to stack both these concessions.
I just have one more question. So I do see that there are a lot of references to the state law, but as you already mentioned, the state law is ever evolving. And so I'm just wondering if there's been any consideration about writing a provision into the ordinance that when our ordinance is in conflict with state law, that state law takes precedent?
Yeah, I do believe there is a statement to that fact in here already. I can try and find it for you, but regardless of whether we have that as a statement, the state law says that any ordinance that's not consistent with this is null and void, and that you have to use state law. But yeah, as I was updating this, I kind of just went with the exact same format that we had in the existing density bonus ordinance, which referenced all these sections of state law. And if you go and look at those references now, they all point to the wrong sections, because they got moved around as new content got added to density bonus. So in some ways, I think it would be cleaner just to reference, just to point to state density bonus law. Anything that's, above and beyond that, then we could include in our ordinance. Otherwise, we just say, look over there and do what that says. So that could be a good recommendation of this commission.
Abby, do you have any questions before we go to public comment?
Just one quick question, and it's on packet page. Let me minimize you guys here. Packet page 11. And it's sub-paragraph 2, the interior finish reductions. I was just wondering if this is like a common concession that's offered, or if this is something that the city council maybe came up with. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on this one section.
Yeah. That is a holdover from our former inclusionary zoning standard, and it's certainly up for discussion. It was not directed by the city council.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Okay, appreciate everyone's questions. I'm going to open this matter for public comment, this item. If you're in person, please feel free to line up at the lectern. There's no one here in person, so if you are on Zoom, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen or by pressing *9 on your phone. The clerk will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. Feel free to state your name for the record. Is there anyone waiting to comment online?
This is still the least popular planning commission meeting all year long.
Okay, a first, always a first. Okay, I appreciate everyone's comments. I appreciate the good questions. I'd like to bring this back to the commission for discussion. I appreciate the thoughtful input, especially from new commissioners. It does remind me of the conversations we had when the numerous previous times we've discussed this, which is it's impossible to know what's going to happen until we start seeing builders iterate on projects and see which path they go. So I still feel like this is as good a starting point as we can put together, given the fact that there's too many variables to know which way things are going to go. But I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks about this language.
There are lots of moving parts, as you suggest. And in preparation for analyzing this proposal, I tried to do some research and did not come to any firm conclusions, but I would like to bring to the commission's and the public's attention a recent scholarly report from April of this year by the Turner Center for Housing Innovation, UC Berkeley, and this report is from, anyway, the author I think is from UCLA. and it's modeling inclusionary zoning's impact on housing production in LA, trade-offs and policy implications. And the report, very scholarly, was written for the benefit of policymakers. And I don't want to paraphrase the conclusion, but in quoting from this report, and this kind of alludes to what you were saying, Scott, there's no firm conclusions. They crunched all kinds of data and modeled it, taking LA's ordinance as a base, but the data they have for rents and housing costs and housing production, they used, I don't know what that database, but it was enormous, and people can find the report on the Turner Center for Housing Innovation website. And essentially, in conclusion, they say poorly calibrated inclusionary policies could lead to reduced housing production and higher rents and housing prices, or both. So it should prompt caution about increasing inclusionary zoning requirements to meet BMR production targets. Even well-designed policies have limits, and producing BMR units through inclusionary zoning may have more costs than benefits. So in conclusion, I think, as you said, Scott, even the scholars on the subject don't know. I mean, you really need to see what happens as things go along. My concern on the inclusionary part of this is that setting the bar at 15 is too low, but that's not my decision to make. The city council has made that decision. But other than that, I mean, I support giving this a go and seeing what happens. It can always be changed down the road by future commissions or city councils.
I want to comment to that. That plays into kind of my question about would a variance be allowed if a developer could show concretely that there is that this ordinance is precluding them from developing based on financial concerns. So if I don't know if it's within this ordinance or within the section of the zoning code for variances, but if we could create an allowed variance that would need discretionary review, that could allow for them to get out of provisions of this ordinance if they were financially precluded from developing. So that could be one addition to this ordinance, or one addition, a text amendment to the zoning code. And then, although it's already baked into state law, I also think that it could just make the ordinance more user-friendly if we did put that provision in about if there was conflict with this law and the state law trumps ours. Even though, like David already said, it's baked in to state law, but it might be nice to see it written here so that people know that, and we aren't inclined to maybe continue to keep updating this ordinance as the state law evolves. So.
Quick question on your reference to the state law on this ordinance. Are you referring to the density bonus laws? Not the inclusionary zoning?
The density, yeah, it's almost like I was talking about both. At first I was talking about a variance related to the inclusionary zoning ordinance, and then I was talking about the state law, density bonus law, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So two commissioners have expressed caution about this penciling for applicants. I feel the same way. It's not up to us. The city council has directed us, but we do have the ability to make a recommendation if we choose to as a group.
Yeah, well, we had initially recommended 30 before it last went to the city council. David, is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, I still feel like that is a good number myself. I'm not sure how much we want to revisit that now. I think also one of the concerns was that if it's set too low, then we're not going to get the inclusionary zoning. Developers are just going to automatically go for the density bonus, and we're not going to get, there's no purpose to inclusionary zoning if it's set too low, that it's not going to be utilized. But back to what I said earlier, back to what Joel was echoing, I really think because we have the ability to revisit this, that we're making assumptions kind of in absence of all the information. Like we just can never really know until we try. But we do have the opportunity to, turn this dial, fiddle with it in the future when we see how these things are working. I just don't know how much mileage we have in continuing to go back and forth over the threshold for inclusionary zoning right now. I do think the simple addition of stating that whatever we do, our laws are superseded by ever-changing state density regulations makes sense. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, the point about density bonus laws changing seems super valid, and nothing we can do. That's just up to the state's nuances, each rewrite. But this inclusionary zoning threshold, if we're all feeling cautious about it, as David said, they don't hear from the builders that just do their homework in the office, and they could be out of town. Who knows where the calculation, they might just call and say, what's your, send us your zoning code. We'd like to study it and find out if it pencils for our project. And if they can't do the math, David might never hear from them or anybody in the planning department. That's a concern to me.
So I think there was a suggestion to sort of advertise that variances could be granted somewhere a little bit more specifically, so that in that sort of situation, the developer would at least reach out to the city and say, hey, we'd love to build a project, but XYZ, we can't make it pencil. I mean, any ordinance could have a variance, right? And so that's already true. I guess the question is just, do we want to advertise it a bit more in the code somewhere?
The two variances are already in there. One is for disability and the other is for elder care, right?
There's also a section 932.030A1 that says that, in part, all residential projects shall provide the following inclusionary housing units unless the review authority approves. I'm sorry, that's referring specifically to alternative inclusionary housing. So yeah, there's nothing in here that explicitly states that, you can get a variance. And a variance in, terms of site standards is kind of different from varying from a, policy decision like this. I think it would be, what I'm hearing from at least a couple commissioners is we should put something explicit in this ordinance that says if a developer can demonstrate that, a project won't pencil for, X, Y, or Z purpose, even given, concessions and incentives, they can request, and the council could authorize a lower lower inclusionary zoning requirement.
And that doesn't tie our hands, but it at least gets rid of this concern that I think we all have, that we're sort of missing all the shots we don't take, right?
Agreed.
And I think making sure that they have to show specific proof, they can't just say, oh, this doesn't pencil out for us. They have to come forward and really prove it, and maybe writing that in.
What's the smallest way that we can send a hint to the city council that we feel like this is maybe a little too low?
Well, I mean, I just want to reflect back on the process that got us here. I can remember several times through the process where each of us, myself included, felt like, trying to get a second bite at the apple after a decision had been made. And, I think that we just need to, respect the process. You could, through your resolution, indicate that the Planning Commission had recommended 30 and still believes that that's a floor, but you understand the council has decided to go with 15, so as not to seem as though you're, attempting a second bite at the apple, just, reflecting on the record. So that's, I guess, one way I would recommend that you do that. And I can certainly work that kind of language into a resolution for, a formal recommendation when this comes back. Also, again, like I'd mentioned before, this may be a good subject for a joint study session. The city council rather is going to be considering dates for joint study sessions with the planning commission. I believe at their next meeting or the very next one after that. And so this may be a, timely topic. There's, a lot of interest in getting inclusionary zoning up and running as soon as we possibly can. I told the council that I thought, sometime within 3 months after adoption of the general plan and the new gateway code that, we'd be ready to be looking at inclusionary zoning. So I feel like, this is a good jump start on that process and, getting the wheels turning in your minds and whatnot to think about these details. So,
Although
those
for the
are just a
record,
couple
it
things
wouldn't
to
be
think
the
about.
first time we've had a joint study session about inclusionary zoning.
It would not be the first time. In fact, I would offer that it's probably apart from sea level rise, maybe one of the most talked about topics
Yeah.
at joint study sessions.
Listening to everyone this evening, I feel like I'm kind of hearing some themes that we have broad consensus around, like everyone's input, of course, but it sounds like we're landing on making sure there's language to announce that state density law supersedes whatever we do, that we would like to see some kind of language so that we don't miss developers who make a decision that it's not going to work, something along the lines of an opportunity for a variance on financial calculations, and that we would like to softly and lovingly and just gently remind the city council that we still think 30 is probably a better number, but that we're sending this back to them as is. Does that more or less capture the tone of the discussion this evening for everyone? And do we need a motion to that regards to pass this, or just a show of hands of agreement from a process standpoint?
I do have one more proposal, but we can agree to this first and then move on if you'd prefer.
Okay.
Maybe a good opportunity for negative polling. Does anybody oppose to those changes?
Is anyone opposed to those additions, changes?
Abby is shaking her head no.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, everyone. So that matter is settled with something else from Matt.
Yeah, Commissioner Strickland brought up the interior finish reductions. I think we should get rid of that. I don't think it's a significant cost. And I mean, to me, one of the appeals of inclusionary zoning is this idea that, lower income folks can have the same apartment as market rate folks. And so the idea that we'd be like giving them a worse dishwasher or something, just, the math doesn't work for me, and the policy feels like a failure to me. So I don't think it's necessary.
I agree. And also it lacks definition. I don't know if the phrase less expensive finishes is defined anywhere in the zoning code. And then I was also curious if anywhere in building code, the cost of materials is even regulated.
Only in its inclusionary zoning requirement.
So
Any disagreement from anyone on this?
to nix or to further clarify interior finish reductions, I think to push back on that a little bit, if we're saying to a developer, we want you to build these, we're telling you can't, you're restricted on what the rent is, and you have to build them as if they were market rate. I'm not quite sure how that, if we're concerned about math already, I'm not quite sure how that works out.
Keep in mind, there's incentives for the developer to offset some of the lost revenue.
I'd love to see what the commission feels as a whole comfortable. Are we wanting to nix or amend the interior finish reductions section?
So I'm not a developer. My understanding is that the vast majority of the costs are from, actually constructing the units and not sort of these interior flourishes. And particularly for, market rate apartments, I just doesn't really, I mean, we're not expecting like marble countertops or anything, right? It's going to be,
Yeah, I mean, those are all very individualized decisions. Again, in the entire, about 17 years that I've worked for the city of Arcata, I have never seen a developer use this interior finish reductions. Certainly I think that the homes that were built in the, community land trust in general have, lesser finishes than, projects in the same subdivision that, were built for the market rate. So, and that was largely just a function of how the developments happened. The same developer didn't develop both. But, I take your point, if someone's building an apartment building, the majority of the cost of that apartment building is in building the building. It's not in, what the countertops are made out of. And it does strain the imagination that we would have something where you'd have in an apartment complex, both really high end and also, affordable housing units. In a condo, we might see something like that, but I'm sure we could work through those details.
Well, that would really challenge a builder if they then are required to use the same finishes throughout the whole building, whether it's, their loft apartment or for sale condo at the top, or, however they want to play it. And that happens in Arcata. There are nicer units in some stories on some buildings, and it would be shameful to say that you can't do that. That seems way too big government for my taste.
Yeah, and it doesn't really say, it says the city, may to the maximum, blah, 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 allow builders to finish out the interior of inclusionary units with less expensive finishes and appliances. Then what? Less expensive than what? Than the most expensive unit, than market standards? It's just feels a little hazy. I'm not even sure exactly what it means.
So if we took it out, it doesn't mean that a builder couldn't use lesser finishes. It's just up to each builder to figure it out throughout the building, what appliances, what everything goes where, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I feel like nowhere is it written right now that they're required to finish every unit with the same material. So it's really leaving it up to their discretion.
So is anyone opposed to removing that language? Abby?
She's shaking her head.
Okay,
Go ahead.
got it. We can't see you. Okay, well, I think that gets us through that discussion, unless there's anything else from staff's end that you didn't, oh, you've got something. Sorry, Joel.
Yeah, I have a comment, and this is on page 9, the exempt residential developments with regarding adaptive reuse being exempt. The number that was set forth is 20 or fewer units. I'm not sure where the 20 came from or how it was derived, but I would suggest that we could increase that number. This is a new provision. So I'd like to, see if other commissioners are on board with bumping up the exemption for adaptive reuse dwelling units to greater than 20, like 29, 30, or some other number.
I guess I'm curious if there are buildings in Arcata that you're thinking of with these, the upper floors of a commercial building that could be made into 20 plus residential units.
Yeah, I don't have a building specifically in mind for this. I think this was language that was in our original inclusionary zoning ordinance, and I carried it forward just because it seemed like an interesting concept. I've been kind of racing up and down, Northtown in my mind, downtown, trying to think like, is there a building that this might apply to? It's hard for me to imagine.
Yeah, 20 is a lot of units on an existing building in the upper floors.
To your point, I'm fine with raising it. Maybe 30, our original cut off twice the current 15, right? Or something like that. But I just don't see it ever happening. Unless someone builds a brand new big commercial building and then decides very quickly that they want to turn it into housing.
Yeah, I just didn't see the downside of increasing it, and as a way of maybe a hint to the city council as well.
Objections to raising that number, even as we think it may not be.
Well, just clarity. Maybe I have this wrong in my mind. If you raise the number, it makes it harder for them to get that exemption. And our previous discussion is about the ways this ordinance could impede development, and that's a concern of ours. So in theory, lowering the number would actually make it possible for the development to occur, correct? Or meet the exemption? No?
So I think it's 20 or fewer. So if you raise it to 30 or fewer,
Sorry.
it
Thank you.
includes more numbers. Yeah.
Anyone opposed to that change?
No.
Abby?
No.
Okay. Any other items that any other commissioners still have on their minds or have not brought forward yet or would like to discuss? Not seeing any? Then did staff get everything you need from the staff end from this discussion?
Yeah, that was great discussion. Thank you. Lots of good changes. I'll incorporate those.
Okay. Moving on now, do we have any correspondence from planning commissioners? Any correspondence from staff?
Is this a good time for me to re-ask the question, or?
Sure.
The question that I proposed last meeting to staff is to find out when, if ever, we any longer have design review authority over ADUs. One was built in my neighborhood. People have asked. I thought it would come through us because they always have in the past. And this one never came through us. And it's a bit of an odd structure, so people are asking about it. Anyway, if you could just update, if that's okay right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So in brief, state accessory dwelling unit law makes it such that ADUs, if they comply with the standards, are ministerial, so they would not come before the Planning Commission for a hearing. If there was an accessory dwelling unit that was proposed that didn't comply with the limitations that are set by state law, then that would come to the commission. And we have, as a community, accepted and sort of an expansion, if you will. We've kind of blended what's required of state law and also what we have in our typical zoning ordinance. And this was a decision that was made in conjunction with the Planning Commission a couple of years ago. And so, for example, one state law standard is that an accessory dwelling unit that's under 16 feet tall is allowed to go through ministerial permitting. In residential low-density zoning districts, the maximum height is 25 feet tall. And oftentimes we have, roof designs, roof pitch and roof design that would exceed the 16 feet if you were to match the existing roof pitch of the primary dwelling unit. And so having conversations like that with the Planning Commission at the time said, well, no, we'd rather just let them go to 25 feet as long as they're under that. Even though the state law limits it to below 25 feet, we'd rather see roof pitches match and so allow them to go above 25 feet. So with the way that we implement state law, we do a little bit of blending of state law and our typical standards. So for the most part, though, the answer is as long as they comply with the the requirements that are in state law, they would be ministerial. If they went outside those or went outside our boundaries, then they would be required to get a permit.
you said requirements of state law, requirements of the city of Arcata's zoning and design standards as well, right?
As well, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So if they, there are some limitations in state law, though, so, in terms of, our zoning. In fact, what the state law says is that any standards that are beyond what are explicitly stated in state law can't be considered. And so, there's setback, there's building height, there's floor area, there's, and I think that's it. And so we've applied our other standards, so things like floor area ratio, site coverage, those things just don't matter when it comes to approving a state ADU. But we have, tried to, take some liberties to ensure that the design of the units are more compatible with existing. So if we had an ADU that came in, and there are a couple that I can tell you right now that I feel like may have quote unquote slipped through the cracks. We've gotten a couple of ADUs that people are like, how is that getting built? And I could walk through those specific ones that, not at this time because it's supposed to be short and I'm already probably way too long. But the idea is that, if they don't get the exemption from state law, we can still say, hey, look, you need to go get a permit because, you're not, complying with sort of the intent that we had when we expanded, these provisions from state law. So, for example, if someone came in and they wanted to build above 16 feet tall, which is what state law allows you to do, but below 25 feet tall, which is what we allow you to do, which the commission has already said, yes, we agree that we want to let these things go through, but the, design of the building was, just, obnoxious and obtrusive, then we could say, you don't comply with state law, you need a design review permit. However, if you fast forward that and think, well, what is the planning commission then going to review? We bring this project to the planning commission. We say to you, it meets the design standards that are established in our code. Then the Housing Accountability Act says you have to approve it. So it's all roads lead to Rome.
So any kind of old subjective standards like neighborhood compatibility or must blend with the.
Those don't apply.
Yeah, yep, okay.
All right. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.
6:32.